In 1996, a survey of children in the United States revealed that 95% of preschoolers had seen a particular television program by the time they were 3 years old. That show, of course, was Sesame Street. Sesame Street, which was created by Joan Gans Cooney and Lloyd Morrisett, debuted on November 10th, 1969, and has continued to provide educational programming for decades. Sesame Street has received 159 Emmy Awards. In addition to the animations, colorful puppets, and visually appealing sets, Sesame Street episodes involve fast-paced action, humor targeted towards preschoolers and their parents, and lots of music. And this music has won 8 Grammy Awards and has been featured on dozens of compilations like Sesame Street Platinum. When my sister and brother-in-law had their first child, they got a minivan. And not just any minivan. The minivan with all the features, including the premium sound system. And for several years, much to the chagrin of my brother-in-law, that premium sound system was used almost exclusively to play Sesame Street Platinum. Now, Sesame Street Platinum is a fun album, the first time, second time, and third time. But it gets a little tedious about the 30th time you hear it in any particular week. But preschoolers like repetition, and they sometimes get fixated on particular movies or shows or albums. And they prefer different music than adults. And just as the music that young children like is different than the music that adolescents and adults like, the best ways to coach young children are different than the best ways to coach adults. If you listen carefully to Sesame Street Platinum, one of the best-selling children's albums of all time, you'll notice some trends. The music that preschoolers like is short, simple, specific, sequential, and shall we say, spirited. Before the Beatles transformed popular music, it was unusual for a Billboard Top 40 hit to last more than 3 minutes. In fact, many of Elvis's #1 hits lasted less than 2 minutes. Now, there were some pre-Beatles exceptions. What I Say by Ray Charles lasted 6 minutes and 27 seconds, which was released in 1959, but most songs were between 1 minute and 45 seconds and 2 minutes and 45 seconds, until the 1960s when the Beatles decided that adults would listen as long as they wanted to sing. Because after all, they were the Beatles. Now it's unusual to hear hits that are less than 3 minutes, and some are 4, 5, or 6 minutes. But music for preschoolers is usually very short, about 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes long per song. And it's simple, with themes that relate to things that kids know, like animals, seasons, primary colors, single-digit numbers, and familiar people like siblings, parents, and firemen. And the music that preschoolers like usually includes specific, detailed lyrics, rather than vague allusions and references. Bob Dylan and Leonard Cohen were incredible songwriters, but they aren't particularly popular with preschoolers, who would rather focus on something like, say, a Rubber Ducky. The music preschoolers like is sequential, building upon itself by telling a story with repetitive lyrics that include phrases sung over and over and over again. And the music preschoolers like is spirited, almost always sung in an almost manic state of jubilant happiness. So what does this tell us about teaching sports skills to preschoolers? I think it means that when designing games to teach sports skills, these games should be short, simple, specific, and sequential. I also think that when teachers are communicating with preschoolers, they should be short, simple, specific, sequential, and spirited. Practices with preschoolers and kindergartners should be short, not 2 hours, maybe not even an hour. And just as important, instructions during practices should be short, maybe 8 to 15 seconds between games. Instruction should be clear and specific, and props can help a great deal. Instead of saying, stand over here or line up over there or space yourself evenly, experienced coaches and PE teachers who've worked with little kids know that it works much better to place hula hoops down on the court or plastic spots on the court and ask each child to stand in a hula hoop or sit on a spot. Practices should be sequential, following a consistent routine. For example, always doing a little warm-up, then rotating through familiar games, taking a snack break, and so on. If you walk into any well-run kindergarten classroom a month or two into the school year and ask a random child to summarize the daily routine, they will give you a very articulate summary. And a substitute teacher who diverges from this routine does so at their own peril. Even when introducing a new skill or a new game, keeping the same order for each session will give kids one less thing to think about so that they can focus on mastering a new skill or learning the new game. But within the routine, new games should be introduced periodically to build upon existing skills in a sequence that guides the child towards mastery of the motor skills in question. Providing very short and specific instructions can expedite the transition from explanation to demonstration to imitation to repetition much more quickly. And the best games are those that have a narrative that ties into their imagination and allows children to progress through a story, a taught game. I used to oversee dozens of tennis coaches who worked with 3 to 14-year-olds across 7 different sites. And I would observe the coaches working with the kids and seek feedback from the parents. But the most reliable source of information about the coach's performance was to watch the kids that they were working with. If the kids looked like they were having a good time without goofing off and spraying water around the court or using their tennis rackets as swords, invariably the coaches were doing a good job. But if the kids looked bored, the reason could always be found by observing the coaches. And to be an effective coach for the youngest children has far more to do with animation and enthusiasm than it does technical ability or tactical know-how. The best tennis players aren't necessarily the best tennis coaches, especially when teaching the youngest children. The most popular coaches were those who obviously enjoyed being around the kids, which was visible in their facial expressions and easily discernible in their vocal tones, which were a bit like Sesame Street songs, trending toward higher pitch vocalizations. The best coaches used exaggerated facial expressions and elated vocal tones while introducing a game or reinforcing good behavior. And parents would walk over to me and say, "Eric, he is just so good with the kids." And like Sesame Street songs, these coaches were funny in ways that were funny to preschool and kindergarten-aged kids, which meant that they didn't take themselves too seriously. And they moved between games quickly. Before the kids could get bored with one game, they moved on to the next, keeping an upbeat pace during the entire session, just like the 2-minute songs on the Sesame Street Platinum album. If you find yourself teaching or coaching kids, make an effort to get to know them as a group and as individuals. One way to do this is to find out what they like and figure out why they like it. There are developmental reasons why preschoolers and kindergartners like to listen to Sesame Street-like music, and why they sometimes get fixated on a particular show or cartoon or movie or album. And these reasons provide important insight in understanding how best to teach them.